The conference room fell silent as the translator's face went pale. Ms. Morrison, I can't understand this dialect. The entire deal is about to collapse. Victoria Morrison's billion-dollar merger was falling apart right before her eyes, and the man who could save it was the same person she'd humiliated in front of her entire executive team just 3 hours earlier. Marcus Webb sat in the driver's seat of the black Mercedes, his hands steady on the wheel, listening to his boss's venomous words echo through the partition. "You're just a driver, Marcus. Remember your place." Marcus had remembered his place, all right. And now, as Victoria's world crumbled in that Atlanta boardroom, Marcus held all the cards. 3 months earlier, Marcus Webb had stood in the lobby of Morrison Tech Industries in downtown Atlanta, Georgia, adjusting his chauffeur's cap for the first time. At 52 years old, Marcus had lived 1,000 lives that nobody at Morrison Tech would ever know about. The Yale-educated former diplomat had spent 27 years moving through the world's most dangerous regions, from the tribal territories of Afghanistan to the political minefields of Brussels, from the bustling markets of Lagos to the boardrooms of Sao Paulo. But life has a way of humbling even the most accomplished among us. When Marcus's wife, Diane, was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's at just 49, Marcus had walked away from his career at the State Department without a second thought. The pension wasn't enough to cover the experimental treatments and the round-the-clock care Diane needed. So Marcus had done what any man who truly loved his wife would do. He'd taken the first job that paid well and offered the flexibility to be there for her. That job happened to be driving Victoria Morrison, the 43-year-old CEO of Morrison Tech Industries, one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the Southeast. Victoria Morrison was everything Marcus had learned to recognize in his diplomatic career: brilliant, ruthless, and completely blind to her own privilege. The daughter of Richard Morrison, who'd built Morrison Tech from a small software company in the 1980s into a tech giant, Victoria had inherited both the company and her father's legendary arrogance. She'd taken the reins 5 years ago, and under her leadership, Morrison Tech had become a major player in artificial intelligence and cloud computing solutions. But Victoria had one fatal flaw. She measured people by their current position, never by their potential or their past. "Marcus, I need you at the office at 6 a.m. tomorrow," Victoria had snapped one morning in September, barely looking up from her phone as Marcus held the car door open for her outside her Buckhead mansion. "And make sure the car is spotless. I'm meeting with the board, and I can't have them seeing me arrive in a dirty vehicle driven by, well, you know." Marcus knew. He'd known his whole life. A black man in America learned early to recognize the pauses, the careful word choices, the assumptions that came with his skin color regardless of his resume. "Yes, Ms. Morrison," Marcus had replied, his voice steady and professional. But Victoria's casual cruelty had escalated over the months. She'd mock Marcus's age in front of her friends. "My driver's practically a fossil, but at least he's cheap." She'd complain about him to her assistant, Maya Chen, loud enough for Marcus to hear through the partition. "I swear, if Daddy hadn't insisted on hiring older workers for good PR, I'd have someone younger and more presentable." Maya, a sharp 28-year-old from San Francisco who'd moved to Atlanta for the job, would often catch Marcus's eye in the rearview mirror, her expression apologetic. Unlike Victoria, Maya treated Marcus with respect, often asking about his day and actually listening to his answers. The breaking point came on a cold November morning in downtown Atlanta. Victoria had been on the phone, screaming at someone about a failed merger negotiation. Morrison Tech had been trying to acquire a smaller AI company called Neural Dynamics for 8 months, but the deal kept hitting obstacles. As Marcus drove the Mercedes through Atlanta's notorious traffic on Peachtree Street, Victoria's frustration boiled over. "This is a disaster," Victoria shouted, slamming her hand on the leather seat. "The Neural Dynamics CEO is bringing in some hotshot negotiation team from Singapore, and our translator just quit. Do you know how hard it is to find someone who speaks Mandarin, Malay, and the specific Hokkien dialect they use in their business dealings?" Marcus's fingers had tightened on the steering wheel. He spoke all 3 languages fluently, along with Arabic, Farsi, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Swahili. But something stopped him from speaking up. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the memory of every dismissive comment Victoria had made. Or maybe Marcus was just tired of offering pearls to people who couldn't see their value. "Marcus, are you even listening?" Victoria snapped, noticing his silence. "Yes, Ms. Morrison. I'm sorry about your difficulties." "My difficulties?" Victoria's laugh was sharp and cold. "What would you know about billion-dollar negotiations? You're just a driver, Marcus. Remember your place." In the rearview mirror, Marcus watched Maya Chen's face flush with embarrassment. Maya opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. Even she, with her progressive San Francisco values, wasn't brave enough to challenge Victoria Morrison directly. "I apologize, Ms. Morrison," Marcus said quietly. "You're right. I'm just a driver." But Marcus Webb was so much more than just a driver, and Victoria Morrison was about to learn that lesson in the most expensive way possible. The deal that would change everything came together with brutal speed. Neural Dynamics, it turned out, wasn't just a small AI company. The Singapore-based firm had developed revolutionary neural network technology that could predict market trends with unprecedented accuracy. Tech giants from Silicon Valley to Shenzhen were circling, but Neural Dynamics' CEO, a brilliant woman named Dr. Mei Lin Tan, had a specific vision. She wanted her company's technology to be used ethically, and she'd only sell to a buyer who understood both the technical and cultural implications of the work. Victoria saw a billion-dollar opportunity. Dr. Tan saw a chance to preserve her legacy. The meeting was set for November 15 at the Morrison Tech headquarters in Atlanta. Dr. Tan would bring her entire executive team, all of them Singaporean Chinese who conducted business in a mixture of English, Mandarin, and their native Hokkien dialect. Victoria had scrambled to find qualified translators, but the best ones were already committed to other contracts. She'd settled for a young translator fresh out of Georgia State University who claimed to speak Mandarin. Marcus had driven Victoria to the office that morning, enduring her nervous rambling about the deal's importance. "This acquisition will put Morrison Tech on the map internationally," Victoria had said, more to herself than to Marcus. "Daddy always said I needed to think bigger. This is my chance to prove I'm not just riding his coattails." For a moment, Marcus had felt a flicker of sympathy for Victoria. He recognized the weight of inherited expectations, the pressure to prove yourself worthy of a legacy you didn't build. But then Victoria had turned to Maya and said, "Make sure Marcus parks out of sight. I don't want Dr. Tan's first impression to be our ancient driver." The sympathy vanished. Marcus had parked in the underground garage and settled in to wait, pulling out a worn copy of Garcia Marquez's Love in the Time of Cholera in the original Spanish. Marcus read it every few years, finding new meaning each time. Today, the book's themes of patience and unexpected redemption felt particularly relevant. He'd been sitting there for nearly 3 hours, lost in the story's beautiful prose, when his phone buzzed. It was Maya Chen. "Marcus," Maya's voice was tight with panic. "We need you in the building. Now. Conference room 12A. Don't ask questions, just come." Marcus closed his book, tucked it into the glove compartment, and made his way through the parking garage to the elevator. His heart was steady, his mind calm. 27 years as a diplomat had taught him to remain composed in crisis situations. Whatever was happening upstairs, Marcus would handle it with the same professionalism he'd brought to every negotiation, every conflict, every impossible situation he'd faced in his career. The elevator doors opened on the 12th floor, and Marcus could hear raised voices before he even reached the conference room. When Marcus walked into that conference room, the scene was even worse than he'd thought possible. Victoria sat at the head of the table, her face ashen, her hands trembling slightly as they gripped the edge of the polished wood. Across from her, Dr. Mei Lin Tan and her team of 5 executives looked like they were about to walk out. The young translator stood frozen near the window, her hands shaking, tears streaming down her face. And in the center of the table lay a crucial contract amendment, written entirely in a specialized Hokkien business dialect that the translator couldn't begin to decipher. "Ms. Morrison," Dr. Tan said in crisp English, her voice cold with disappointment, "this meeting was clearly a mistake. If you cannot even understand the cultural nuances of our business language, how can we trust you to honor the ethical commitments of our technology?" Dr. Tan stood up, and her executive team began gathering their materials. "We will be meeting with representatives from Google tomorrow. They, at least, have taken the time to understand who we are and what we value." Victoria's eyes found Marcus standing in the doorway, and for one brief moment, Marcus saw something flicker across her face. Was it recognition? Hope? Or just more desperation? "Marcus," Victoria's voice cracked slightly, barely above a whisper, Maya said, "she said you might be able to help?" Every eye in the room turned to Marcus. The old black man in the chauffeur's uniform, standing in the doorway of a billion-dollar negotiation. Dr. Tan's expression was skeptical. Her executives exchanged glances that ranged from confused to dismissive. The young translator looked at Marcus with a mixture of hope and embarrassment. This was the moment. This was Marcus's choice. Marcus could walk away. He could let Victoria's empire of arrogance crumble. He could drive back to his modest home in East Point, Georgia, tend to Diane, and find another job. Lord knows Victoria deserved the lesson. Every cruel comment, every dismissive glance, every time she'd treated him as less than human, all of it justified walking away right now. But Marcus had learned something in his 27 years as a diplomat, something that had guided him through war zones and peace negotiations, through cultural misunderstandings and international crises. True power isn't in the revenge you take, but in the grace you show when you have every right to walk away. Marcus stepped into the room. "May I see the document?" Marcus asked, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable authority that made everyone sit up straighter. The energy in the room shifted immediately. Something about Marcus's tone, his bearing, the calm confidence in his words, made people pay attention. Dr. Tan's eyes narrowed with interest. She studied Marcus for a long moment, then slowly slid the papers across the table. Marcus picked up the contract amendment and began to read. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the air conditioning humming, the distant sound of traffic 12 floors below, the rustle of paper as Marcus turned the first page. Marcus read through the first page of the contract amendment, his eyes moving smoothly across the complex Hokkien characters. The specialized business dialect was one he'd learned during his 3 years stationed in Singapore in the early 2000s, working on trade negotiations between the United States and several Southeast Asian nations. The language was beautiful, precise, layered with cultural meaning that went back centuries. Every phrase carried weight, every word choice conveyed respect or its absence. This wasn't just a contract. This was a test of cultural competence, and Victoria's translator had failed spectacularly. Marcus set down the first page and looked up at Dr. Tan. Then Marcus began to speak, not in English, but in flawless Hokkien, the specialized business dialect that Dr. Tan's team used for their most sensitive negotiations. "Dr. Tan, this amendment addresses your concerns about data sovereignty and ethical AI deployment. Your team has outlined 3 core principles that must be maintained post-acquisition: user privacy protection, algorithmic transparency, and community benefit sharing. These principles are rooted in the Singaporean Chinese business philosophy of collective responsibility, which honors both individual innovation and community welfare." Dr. Tan's jaw dropped. Her executives leaned forward, astonished. One of them, a man in his 60s with silver hair, actually gasped. Marcus continued, switching between Hokkien and Mandarin as he explained the nuances of each clause, the historical context of certain phrases, the subtle implications that even a good translator might miss. Marcus spoke as someone who didn't just know the language, but understood the culture, the history, the heart of what these words really meant. "The third clause here," Marcus said, pointing to a specific section while speaking in Hokkien, references the traditional concept of Guan 11 or relational networks, but it's using the Hokkien variation that specifically applies to business partnerships built on mutual respect rather than hierarchical power. This is significant because it means you're not just selling your company. You're entering into a relationship that requires Morrison Tech to honor your values as if they were family obligations. One of Dr. Tan's younger executives whispered a question in Mandarin about technical specifications. Without missing a beat, Marcus switched to Mandarin and answered, explaining how the technical requirements aligned with the ethical framework. Then Marcus turned to Victoria and switched to English, ensuring she understood every nuance of what was being discussed. Back to Hokkien for a complex technical explanation about data protection protocols. To Malay when Dr. Tan's operations director asked a question in his native tongue about implementation timelines. Marcus wasn't just translating. Marcus was building bridges between worlds. He understood what each side really wanted beneath their stated positions. He knew when to be direct and when to be subtle, when to translate literally and when to interpret the spirit behind the words. For 45 minutes, Marcus guided that negotiation with the skill of the seasoned diplomat he had been. He saw the pressure points and smoothed them over. He anticipated objections before they were raised. He found common ground where everyone else had seen only conflict. Marcus explained how Morrison Tech's existing privacy policies could be strengthened to meet Neural Dynamics' standards. He translated Dr. Tan's concerns about American corporate culture and helped Victoria understand why those concerns were valid and how they could be addressed. He facilitated a discussion about creating an independent ethics board that would oversee the technology's deployment, something neither side had considered before but that Marcus recognized would satisfy both parties' core interests. When Marcus finally set down the papers, the room remained silent. But it was a different kind of silence now. Not the tense, uncomfortable silence of a failing negotiation, but the thoughtful silence of people processing something profound. Dr. Tan sat back in her chair, her expression transformed. The skepticism was gone, replaced by something that looked like wonder mixed with deep respect. Her executives were nodding to each other, having quiet conversations in Hokkien that Marcus could hear but chose not to acknowledge. Then Dr. Tan stood up. She walked around the table, past Victoria, straight to Marcus. Dr. Tan bowed deeply, a gesture of profound respect that made her executive team immediately stand and bow as well. Mr. Webb, Dr. Tan said in English, her voice filled with emotion, I don't know your full story, but I recognize a true diplomat when I see one. Your skill just saved this negotiation. But more than that, you showed me something I needed to see. You showed me that Morrison Tech has someone who truly understands what we value. Dr. Tan turned to Victoria. Ms. Morrison, I came to Atlanta skeptical that an American tech CEO could truly understand and honor the cultural values embedded in my company's work. I've turned down offers from companies 3 times your size because they saw Neural Dynamics as just another acquisition, just another piece of technology to exploit. But you have someone on your team who clearly does understand these things. Someone with wisdom, experience, and genuine cultural competence. Dr. Tan paused, letting her words sink in. I will sign this deal. But I have one condition, Mr. Webb must be part of the integration team. Not as a driver. As a cultural liaison and senior advisor. His presence gives me confidence that Morrison Tech can be trusted with my life's work. Victoria's face cycled through a dozen expressions in the span of seconds. Shock, confusion, embarrassment, and finally, to her credit, something that looked like genuine humility. Her hands, which had been gripping the table edge, relaxed. She took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice was different. Smaller. More human. Of course, Victoria said quietly. Whatever Mr. Webb is willing to do. But Marcus wasn't finished yet. There was something that needed to be said, something that everyone in this room needed to hear. Not for revenge, not for satisfaction, but because truth matters. Because dignity matters. Because the lesson Victoria needed to learn wasn't complete. Dr. Tan, Marcus said, I'm honored by your offer. But before I accept, there's something everyone in this room should know. Marcus turned to face Victoria directly. The young translator had stopped crying and was watching with wide eyes. Maya-chan stood near the door, her expression a mixture of pride and apprehension. Dr. Tan's executive team waited, curious about what would come next. Marcus took a breath and began to speak. Ms. Morrison, for 3 months, I've driven you all over Atlanta. I've listened to you complain about finding translators, about struggling with international deals, about proving yourself to your father's legacy. I've heard you worry about negotiations in languages you don't speak, about cultural contexts you don't understand. Marcus's voice was calm, measured, but there was steel underneath. And not once, not one single time, did you ask me about my background, my education, or my experience. You never asked because you'd already decided who I was based on my age, my job title, and the color of my skin. The room was so quiet you could hear the HVAC system humming through the vents. Victoria's face had gone completely pale. Maya-chan had tears in her eyes. Dr. Tan and her team watched with absolute focus, understanding that they were witnessing something important, something that went beyond business deals and contract negotiations. I have a master's degree in international relations from Yale, Marcus continued. I spent 27 years as a diplomat for the United States State Department. I've negotiated peace agreements in Kabul, Afghanistan, where I spent 6 months living among tribal leaders, learning their languages and customs, helping to broker ceasefires that saved hundreds of lives. I've worked on trade deals in Brussels, navigating the complex politics of the European Union. I've coordinated humanitarian aid in Lagos, Nigeria, during a crisis that threatened to destabilize the entire region. I speak 9 languages fluently: English, Spanish, French, Portuguese, Arabic, Farsi, Mandarin, Hokkien, and Swahili. Marcus paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. I could have helped you months ago, saved you time and money and stress, if you'd ever once treated me like a human being worthy of a conversation instead of just a driver. Every time you complained about language barriers, I was sitting 3 feet away from you. Every time you worried about cultural misunderstandings, the person who'd built a career on cultural competence was holding your car door open. But you never saw me. You saw a uniform and a black face and you decided that was all you needed to know. Victoria's hands were shaking. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Marcus, Her voice broke. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything right now, Marcus said, and his voice softened just slightly. But I need you to understand something. This isn't about making you feel guilty. This is about recognizing a pattern that's bigger than just you and me. It's about how we treat people based on assumptions. It's about how we miss opportunities for connection, for learning, for growth, because we're too busy categorizing people into boxes labeled important and not important. Marcus looked around the room, his gaze taking in everyone present. Every single person in this room has made assumptions about me today. Some of you, he glanced at Dr. Tan's team, wondered why a chauffeur was being called into a business negotiation. Some of you, his eyes moved to the young translator, felt embarrassed that someone in a uniform could do what you couldn't. And some of you, he looked directly at Victoria, have been making those assumptions for 3 months straight. But here's the thing, Marcus said, and his voice carried a warmth now, a grace that seemed to fill the entire room. I'm still going to help you. Not because you deserve it, Ms. Morrison, but because Dr. Tan deserves to see her life's work treated with respect. And because my wife, Diane, taught me something a long time ago. She taught me that we become better people by choosing grace even when we're entitled to anger. She taught me that revenge might feel good in the moment, but it doesn't heal anything. It doesn't change anything. It just perpetuates cycles of hurt. Marcus turned back to Dr. Tan. I accept your offer, Dr. Tan. But I have my own condition. Part of my compensation must include full medical benefits that cover experimental Alzheimer's treatments. My wife needs care that my current salary and benefits can't provide. That's why I took this job in the first place. That's why I've endured 3 months of being treated as invisible. Because love makes us do things we never thought we'd have to do. Because sometimes dignity takes a back seat to necessity. But if I'm going to be your cultural liaison and senior advisor, I need to know that Diane will have access to the treatments she needs. Dr. Tan smiled, and it was warm and genuine and full of understanding. Done. And Mr. Webb, I'd like to triple whatever salary you were making as Ms. Morrison's driver. Someone with your experience and skills is worth far more than you've been paid. Consider it an investment in ensuring this acquisition succeeds. She extended her hand, and Marcus shook it. The deal, it seemed, was far from over. But it was moving in a new direction now, one that Marcus had redirected through honesty, skill, and an unexpected choice to help rather than harm. Victoria stood up slowly. She walked over to where Marcus stood, and for the first time since he'd started working for her, she really looked at him. Not through him, not past him, but at him. Marcus, Victoria said, and her voice was barely above a whisper, I need you to know that I hear you. I hear what you're saying, and I'm ashamed. I'm ashamed of how I've treated you. I'm ashamed of the person I've been. And I know that saying, I'm sorry, isn't enough. Words aren't enough. But I want to try. I want to be better. I want to learn from this. Marcus nodded slowly. Then that's where we start, Ms. Morrison. With the wanting to be better. The rest comes with time and effort and a willingness to be uncomfortable while you unlearn patterns that have been comfortable for you. He paused, then added, and for what it's worth, I believe people can change. I've seen warlords become peacekeepers. I've seen politicians who built careers on division learn to build bridges instead. If they can change, anyone can. The meeting continued for another hour. Marcus facilitated the discussion, helping both sides hammer out the details of the integration plan. Dr. Tan's team warmed to him quickly, sharing stories about their own experiences with cultural misunderstandings in business. The young translator apologized to Marcus, and he was kind to her, explaining that language learning is a journey and that specialized business dialects take years to master. Maya-chan kept catching his eye and smiling, clearly proud and relieved that the situation had resolved the way it had. By the time everyone left that conference room, the foundation had been laid not just for a business deal, but for something more profound. A reckoning had occurred. Truth had been spoken. And grace had been chosen over revenge. 3 weeks later, the deal was finalized. Morrison Tech acquired Neural Dynamics for $1.1 billion, the largest acquisition in the company's history. The announcement made headlines across the tech industry, praised as a model for ethical AI development and international business collaboration. Marcus Webb became the Senior Vice President of International Relations at Morrison Tech, with an office on the executive floor and a compensation package that not only covered Diane's treatments but gave them both a security they'd never thought possible. The experimental treatments were working. Diane was stable, and some days, she remembered everything with crystal clarity. Those were the days Marcus treasured most, when he could tell her about his new role, about the surprising turn his life had taken, and she could understand and celebrate with him. Victoria Morrison had called Marcus into her office on his first day in his new role. The office was different now. Marcus noticed she'd removed some of the more ostentatious decorations, the awards and plaques that had screamed, "Look how successful I am." The space felt more human, more humble. Victoria stood by the window overlooking downtown Atlanta, and when she turned to face Marcus, her expression was serious. "I need to say something," Victoria had begun, and her voice was different, quieter, more careful. "I've been thinking about this for weeks, and I still don't know if I can find the right words." "Then just speak from the heart," Marcus had said simply, settling into one of the chairs across from her desk. Victoria nodded and took a seat as well, not behind the desk but in the chair next to Marcus, putting them on the same level. I was wrong. About you. About how I treated you. Victoria looked directly at Marcus, and her eyes were red-rimmed, like she'd been crying recently or was trying not to cry now. My father built this company by believing in people, by seeing potential where others saw limitations. He used to tell me that the most valuable resource any company has isn't technology or money, it's people. And I betrayed his legacy by doing the exact opposite. I saw you as nothing but a driver because it made me feel important. I never questioned my own prejudices. I never looked deeper. And that almost cost me everything. Victoria paused, gathering her thoughts. I've been doing a lot of reading these past few weeks. Books about unconscious bias, about systemic racism, about how privilege makes you blind to other people's experiences. I joined a leadership group for executives working on inclusive practices. I've been meeting with a consultant who specializes in organizational culture change. Because I realized something, Marcus. I realized that if I treated you that way, how many other people at this company have I dismissed? How many talented employees have I overlooked because they didn't fit my narrow definition of what success looks like? That's a good question to ask yourself, Marcus said. And it's a painful one. But asking painful questions is how we grow. Victoria nodded. I can't undo the things I said. I can't take back the disrespect. But I can promise you this, I'm going to do better. I'm going to be better. And Marcus, if you're willing, I'd like to learn from you. Not just about international relations, but about leadership. Real leadership. The kind that sees people for who they really are. Marcus had studied Victoria for a long moment. He saw genuine remorse in her eyes, genuine commitment to change. It would have been easy to stay angry, to hold on to the hurt, to make her grovel more. But Marcus had learned something in his years of diplomacy: transformation requires space to happen. If you keep someone trapped in their worst moment, they can never become something better. I believe in second chances, Ms. Morrison. Let's see what you do with yours. They shook hands, and Marcus could see the relief in Victoria's eyes, the gratitude, but also the determination. She wasn't asking for forgiveness to make herself feel better. She was committing to change. The months that followed proved Victoria's sincerity. She implemented new policies at Morrison Tech: blind resume reviews for hiring, mandatory unconscious bias training for all managers, and a mentorship program that paired executives with employees from different backgrounds. She started a fund, the Marcus Webb Fellowship, providing scholarships for older workers looking to change careers and caregivers needing flexible work arrangements. The fellowship would cover tuition, provide stipends, and connect participants with mentors in their desired fields. But the story's most unexpected twist came 2 months after Marcus started his new role. Maya Chen had knocked on Marcus's office door one afternoon with an unusual request. "Marcus, there's someone here to see you. She says she's a journalist, but she won't tell me what it's about. She asked specifically for you and says it's important." Marcus had been reviewing contracts for a potential partnership with a tech company in Brazil, work that felt natural and energizing in a way that driving never had. "Send her in," Marcus said, curious. The woman who entered Marcus's office was in her early 60s, black, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that radiated both warmth and determination. She wore a professional pantsuit and carried a worn leather portfolio. She introduced herself as Patricia Webb Johnson, a reporter from the Chicago Tribune. Marcus's heart skipped. Webb Johnson. A black woman with a hyphenated name that included his own surname. It couldn't be a coincidence. "Mr. Webb," Patricia had said, sitting down across from his desk, "I've been researching a story about unsung heroes of American diplomacy, people who did extraordinary work but never got public recognition. Your name kept coming up in my interviews with State Department personnel. They told me about your work negotiating the release of American hostages in Somalia in 2016. About how you single-handedly prevented a diplomatic crisis between the U.S. and Brazil over environmental policy in 2018. About the time you mediated a tribal dispute in Afghanistan that saved an entire village from certain destruction." Marcus had felt his throat tighten. That was classified work. How did you? Times change. Documents get declassified. People retire and feel free to tell the truth. Patricia had smiled. "Mr. Webb, you're a genuine American hero. And I'd like to tell your story, not just your diplomatic work, but everything that came after. The sacrifice you made for your wife. The humiliation you endured at Morrison Tech. And the grace you showed when you had every right to walk away." Marcus had started to protest, but Patricia had held up her hand. "I know you're a private person. But there are thousands of people out there, black men especially, but really anyone who's ever been underestimated, dismissed, or treated as less than, who need to hear this story. They need to know that dignity isn't about your job title. They need to see that sometimes, the person society overlooks is exactly the person with the wisdom to save the day. She paused, then added, and Mr. Webb, I should mention, my maiden name was Webb. We're distant cousins. Your grandfather and my grandmother were siblings. I've been tracking our family history for years, and when your name came up in my research, I knew we were connected. Marcus had looked at the photo on his desk, Diane smiling on their wedding day 30 years ago in Birmingham, Alabama. He thought about all the black men and women who'd been told they weren't good enough, smart enough, worthy enough. He thought about the next generation who needed to see examples of grace in the face of injustice. If I agree, Marcus had said slowly, there's one condition, Victoria Morrison's name doesn't get dragged through the mud. She made mistakes, but she owned them. She's working every day to be better. That kind of growth deserves to be protected, not punished. Patricia had nodded, her respect for Marcus visibly deepening. We can do that. Change the names, blur the identifying details. The story isn't really about Morrison Tech anyway. It's about you, Marcus. It's about the quiet heroism of choosing grace. The article ran 6 months later, and it went viral in ways that even Patricia hadn't anticipated. People across America, across the world, read about the diplomat-turned-driver who saved $1 billion deal and chose forgiveness over revenge. The story resonated especially deeply in black communities, where countless people had their own stories of being underestimated, of having their credentials questioned, of being made invisible by other people's prejudices. Marcus received hundreds of letters and emails. A black professor at Howard University wrote about being mistaken for maintenance staff at academic conferences despite having a PhD and 20 published books. A black surgeon shared her experience of patients refusing her care, assuming she was a nurse. A black executive told Marcus about being asked to get coffee for clients who didn't realize he was the CEO they were meeting. But the article did something else too. It started conversations in corporate boardrooms and around dinner tables about how we value people, about the assumptions we make, about the wisdom and experience we overlook when we judge others by their current circumstances rather than their full humanity. Business schools began using Marcus's story in their ethics and leadership courses. Churches and community centers invited him to speak. A documentary filmmaker reached out about making a short film. And at Morrison Tech, something fundamental had changed. The company had become a model for inclusive leadership. Victoria had brought in diverse voices at every level, from the boardroom to entry-level positions. She'd created transparent pathways for advancement, eliminated pay gaps based on demographics, and established employee resource groups that had real power to influence company policy. Carlos Mendez, the IT guy who turned out to have a PhD in computer science from Madrid, was now the chief technology officer. The janitor Victoria now asked about his weekend had revealed he was working on a novel and had dreams of being a writer. Victoria connected him with her own literary agent. Victoria had also built mentorship relationships with 3 young women of color at the company, consciously working to give them the support Victoria had never thought to offer Marcus. She met with them monthly, helped them navigate corporate politics, advocated for their promotions, and used her privilege to open doors that might have remained closed. It wasn't perfect. Change never is. But it was real, and it was sustained, and it mattered. On the 1-year anniversary of that fateful meeting, Marcus stood in the Morrison Tech conference room, the same room where everything had changed. The company was throwing a celebration for the successful integration of neural dynamics, which had exceeded all projections. The neural network technology was being used ethically, just as Dr. Tan had hoped, helping small businesses predict market trends and compete with larger corporations. Diane was there, sitting in the front row, having one of her good days. She was smiling, proud, fully present. Victoria stood off to the side, and when their eyes met, Victoria smiled, a real smile, full of gratitude and hard-won wisdom. Marcus stepped to the podium and looked out at the assembled employees, young and old, from dozens of countries, speaking dozens of languages. I want to tell you something my wife told me years ago, Marcus began. Diane said that every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about, carrying wisdom you can't see, and holding a story that could change your life, if only you're willing to listen. Marcus paused, letting the words settle. We spend so much time putting people in boxes, making assumptions, deciding who's important and who's not based on job titles and appearances. But the truth is, you never know who's sitting next to you. You never know what that person has survived, what they've learned, what they have to offer. You never know when the person you dismiss might be the person who saves you. Marcus looked directly at Victoria. And you never know when the person who hurts you might become the person who learns from that hurt and uses it to create real change. That's the power of second chances. That's the power of choosing to see people, really see them, as full human beings. The room erupted in applause, but Marcus wasn't finished. So here's my challenge to everyone in this room: ask questions. Listen to answers. Don't assume you know someone's story just because you know their job title. Look for wisdom in unexpected places. Offer grace when you have every right to withhold it. And remember that the measure of a person isn't where they are right now, but who they choose to be when they have the power to choose. The applause was thunderous this time, a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. But the real victory was quieter. It was in the way Victoria now asked the janitor about his weekend and actually listened to his answer, learning about his daughter's graduation and his hopes for her future. It was in the new promotion of Carlos Mendez, the IT guy who turned out to have a PhD in computer science from Madrid and was now leading the company's most innovative projects. It was in the mentorship relationship Victoria had built with 3 young women of color at the company, consciously working to give them the support Victoria had never thought to offer Marcus. It was in every small interaction where someone chose to see past the surface, to ask deeper questions, to treat every person with the dignity they deserved. And it was in Marcus himself, who'd learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to punish the people who wrong you, but to give them the chance to be better than they were. Because in the end, justice isn't always about revenge. Sometimes, justice is about transformation. Sometimes it's about showing people a mirror so clear that they can't help but see themselves honestly. Sometimes it's about creating space for growth even when you've been hurt. And karma? Well, karma is what happens when you realize that the person you dismissed as just a driver was actually the person who'd been driving toward grace all along. As the celebration wound down and Marcus helped Diane to the car, his car now, parked in the executive lot with his name on the reserved spot, Victoria Morrison caught up with them. Marcus, Victoria said quietly, thank you. For everything. But especially for seeing who I could become, even when I couldn't see it myself. Marcus nodded. We all deserve the chance to be more than our worst moments, Victoria. Remember that, and pass it on. As Marcus drove away from Morrison Tech that night, Diane reached over and squeezed his hand. You did good, baby, Diane said, her eyes clear and present. You always do. Marcus Webb, diplomat, driver, and now Senior Vice President of International Relations, smiled. Because sometimes the longest journey we take isn't across countries or oceans. Sometimes it's the journey from being invisible to being seen. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, it's the journey we help others take, from prejudice to understanding, from arrogance to humility, from judgment to grace. That's the real billion-dollar lesson. That's the story worth telling. That's the transformation that changes not just one person or one company, but ripples out into the world, touching everyone who hears it and reminding them that we all have the power to choose who we become. What would you have done in Marcus's position? Would you have helped Victoria after everything she put you through? Share your thoughts below, and if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. More stories of justice, karma, and the power of grace coming your way. This is Black Lives Stories, reminding you that every person has a story worth hearing, and sometimes the people we overlook are the ones with the most to teach us. We spend so much time putting people in boxes, making assumptions, deciding who's important and who's not based on job titles and appearances. But the truth is, you never know who's sitting next to you. You never know what that person has survived, what they've learned, what they have to offer. You never know when the person you dismiss might be the person who saves you. Marcus looked directly at Victoria. And you never know when the person who hurts you might become the person who learns from that hurt and uses it to create real change. That's the power of second chances. That's the power of choosing to see people, really see them, as full human beings. The room erupted in applause, but Marcus wasn't finished. So here's my challenge to everyone in this room: ask questions. Listen to answers. Don't assume you know someone's story just because you know their job title. Look for wisdom in unexpected places. Offer grace when you have every right to withhold it. And remember that the measure of a person isn't where they are right now, but who they choose to be when they have the power to choose. The applause was thunderous this time, a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. But the real victory was quieter. It was in the way Victoria now asked the janitor about his weekend and actually listened to his answer, learning about his daughter's graduation and his hopes for her future. It was in the new promotion of Carlos Mendez, the IT guy who turned out to have a PhD in computer science from Madrid and was now leading the company's most innovative projects. It was in the mentorship relationship Victoria had built with 3 young women of color at the company, consciously working to give them the support Victoria had never thought to offer Marcus. It was in every small interaction where someone chose to see past the surface, to ask deeper questions, to treat every person with the dignity they deserved. And it was in Marcus himself, who'd learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to punish the people who wrong you, but to give them the chance to be better than they were. Because in the end, justice isn't always about revenge. Sometimes, justice is about transformation. Sometimes it's about showing people a mirror so clear that they can't help but see themselves honestly. Sometimes it's about creating space for growth even when you've been hurt. And karma? Well, karma is what happens when you realize that the person you dismissed as just a driver was actually the person who'd been driving toward grace all along. As the celebration wound down and Marcus helped Diane to the car, his car now, parked in the executive lot with his name on the reserved spot, Victoria Morrison caught up with them. Marcus, Victoria said quietly, thank you. For everything. But especially for seeing who I could become, even when I couldn't see it myself. Marcus nodded. We all deserve the chance to be more than our worst moments, Victoria. Remember that, and pass it on. As Marcus drove away from Morrison Tech that night, Diane reached over and squeezed his hand. You did good, baby, Diane said, her eyes clear and present. You always do. Marcus Webb, diplomat, driver, and now Senior Vice President of International Relations, smiled. Because sometimes the longest journey we take isn't across countries or oceans. Sometimes it's the journey from being invisible to being seen. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, it's the journey we help others take, from prejudice to understanding, from arrogance to humility, from judgment to grace. That's the real billion-dollar lesson. That's the story worth telling. That's the transformation that changes not just one person or one company, but ripples out into the world, touching everyone who hears it and reminding them that we all have the power to choose who we become. What would you have done in Marcus's position? Would you have helped Victoria after everything she put you through? Share your thoughts below, and if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. More stories of justice, karma, and the power of grace coming your way. This is Black Lives Stories, reminding you that every person has a story worth hearing, and sometimes the people we overlook are the ones with the most to teach us.